as we've been saying, and everybody's been saying, everybody is talking about Facebook and about Cambridge Analytica. Our next guest is a good friend of the program, I'd like to say. He's been on several times. We always appreciate his perspective. Yasha Levine is a journalist. He's a former editor of the Moscow-based satirical newspaper, The Exile. He's the author of the recent book, Surveillance Valley, and if I remember correctly, but he'll correct me, the subtitle is The Secret Military History of the Internet. I can see it right there. And he wrote a piece that I thought did a great job of putting the Cambridge Analytica story in context. So he joins us now. First of all, Yasha, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Secondly, what are people getting wrong about the Cambridge Analytica story that came out this past week?
Well, I think, what's wrong about the way that the story is being framed is that it's ahistorical and lacks context, because right now most of the stories that you read frame Cambridge Analytica as this kind of company that's somehow completely different, something unique to the American political system. But really, Cambridge Analytica is just one of many firms that hawk their data-driven election influence techniques to campaigns in America, but all around the world. And in terms of data and the kind of data that it's collecting on people and the kind of profiles that it's building on people, really doesn't stand out. What's interesting is what it's being accused of, siphoning data from, using it to build profiles and then using those profiles to influence voters, right? What it's accused of doing is something that Facebook and Google do every single minute of every single day on all of us as a matter of routine. That is their underlying business model. And so there is a kind of I think, a problem with differentiating Cambridge Analytica, from the underlying surveillance and data-driven influence business that underlies our digital economy and the internet in general.
Yeah, and I think, I think that people who are understandably upset about what we've learned about Cambridge Analytica, I think it's important to kind of unpack the different things that people can or might or should be angry about. One, and I think, one of the themes, the fundamental theme of your book is that the internet as structured today is fundamentally a surveillance machine. Life as a surveillance machine began with surveillance in mind and is now designed to conduct 24-hour surveillance on its users for economic reasons, for economic gain on the part of different companies. So I think if people are upset about that, as I believe they should be upset about the whole internet as we use it today. If people are upset about the political use of their data, we should talk about that. And if people are upset specifically about Donald Trump's use of it or Steve Bannon's use of it, then I would say we should have a conversation about who they think are acceptable users of this kind of private data, because I would say nobody. But let's sort of go through some of those pieces of this a little bit. One of the things you talk about in your article is that even the seemingly benign apps, you mentioned Angry Birds, for example, which seems like just a fun, silly thing, is pulling data from you all the time. I would assume that the Zynga apps of Words with Friends and Farmville and Mafia Wars, most of which I thought were, by the way, just kind of in design, kind of lifted from other long-standing things that were out there. But be that as it may, I mean, all of these apps basically take data elements from people. I think they'd be surprised to find out about, right?
I mean, yeah, look, it's not Facebook, it's not Google, it's the entire ecosystem. I mean, yes, it's kind of silly games like Angry Birds that kids play. Pandora, for instance, the music streaming service, the radio, it enriched its revenue stream by selling access to listeners and trying to profile their political orientation based on the music that they listen to and based on other third-party data that they're able to get while you're using the service, and then selling ads to political campaigns. I mean, that was kind of one of their pitches. They were like selling ads, and so Pandora is one of them. But it's bigger than that. It's eBay. It's Amazon. It's pretty much everything that's connected to the internet is in some way spying on you and then trying to monetize the information that it can glean from your activity online. It is the entire ecosystem, and even things like even things that are kind of offline now are doing that as well. One of the recent ones was MoviePass, for instance. MoviePass is this new startup that gives people access to as many movies as they can watch in a month. You pay $10 a month, and you can go to any movie theater, right? And people wondered, like, okay, so how are you going to make that work as a business model? And the CEO came out and said, well, we're going to make that work by selling people's data and selling people's data to studios, to the movie industry, because we're going to be able to see exactly what people are interested in, and they're still trying to figure out how they're going to monetize. That is like a plank of their business model as a startup, is to sell surveillance data on their users. And of course, no one really knows that when they sign up for this service. And no one really knows where that data will end up. That data could end up in Cambridge Analytica's database. It could end up in some giant third-party data broker, right? That just collects and vacuums up any kind of data it can buy on the market, and then resells that data to its clients. Companies like Experian or Axion, and so the whole thing is just our digital ecosystem, our digital economy is run on surveillance. It's everywhere you look, and so the freak out over Cambridge Analytica, like you pointed out, is I think a lot more connected not to actually what it was doing, because President Obama did this in his campaigns. Used pretty much the same kind of tactics that Hillary Clinton did as well. The Republican Party does this all the time. Charles Koch even has almost a personal kind of data-driven elections outfit called I360 that collects pretty much the same information that Cambridge Analytica collected. And it's actually a much bigger operation than Cambridge Analytica. I mean, I think what people are really freaked out about over Cambridge Analytica is that it's connected to Trump, right? It's connected to Donald Trump. And, people are looking for a reason, people are looking to find a reason why Donald Trump exists, why he was elected. And people are trying to find something, something unique, something special that they can pin that blame on. And it's, while not looking at sort of the underlying political problems that helped, catapult him into power, right, that are not being addressed by the Democratic Party. So I think, kind of the liberal establishment, the Democratic establishment is looking for a reason to pin, the blame for Donald Trump. And so, we have this Russian influence that's been, thrown around, and accusations of Russian influence and collusion that hasn't really kind of come up. And nothing from that investigation that Robert Mueller is conducting has really, brought up anything significant. And so, I see this freak out over Cambridge Analytica as a kind of another version of that, right? People are trying to find something to explain Donald Trump, something other than politics, and this is a kind of a magic weapon that it's deploying to bamboozle and to zombify, American voters and to vote against their interests.
Well, that's a whole other dimension of this that
Exactly.
I'd be happy to talk about. But and we should. But first of all, because I talk about that a lot on this show. First of all, on the data side, I mean, I think people have been saying for years. Mood seems to be shifting now, I hope. But people have been saying for years, well, what do I care what they do with my data? Maybe they even use it to show me advertisements for things I'm more likely to want to buy. What's wrong with that? But I think now there's a growing sense that people are starting to see the world, a sort of custom-made version of the world. They navigate the world through the internet. And now they're beginning to get the sense of, well, the ads that come up, the Facebook, even if the news feed, even if you say you want it chronologically rather than curated by Facebook, they decide what you see and don't see. Twitter decides what whatever. So people are starting to see a stage managed sort of Truman Show version of the world created just for them based on their likes and dislikes. And I think people are starting to get a little worried about that. But and people are also getting worried because it's like those science fiction shows, where there's a monster that feeds on rage. So feed me. There's also, things that piss you off. You'll click and you'll respond. So there's all this stuff being talked about now. But as you said, Cambridge Analytica is being discussed as if it's a unique monster out there, and if it's one of the keys to understanding why the nation didn't love us as much as it should, and chose Donald Trump instead. It's a soothing kind of bedtime story for liberals who feel rejected, maybe. But
Yes.
if we're in terms of that dimension of it, you mentioned that similar things were done by Obama. Actually, the one of the data scientists for Obama's 2008 campaign has been out there talking about how Facebook gave them data too, and they used data. It wasn't considered sinister then, but you said Hillary's campaign did this also?
Well, yeah, I mean, they had the, Robbie Mook, right? Who had, there's all sorts of different systems that were in place to use data to target voters and to understand where to allocate resources and what kind of strategies to undertake, for the campaign. Hillary Clinton supposedly had one of the brightest, best teams available in the world, working on her campaign and using data. They had a whole system called, I think it was called ADA. That modeled the entire electorate, and it was like a kind of almost like a global view of the battlefield, of the political battlefield, and Hillary Clinton and her generals could kind of look at it and see what they need to do and who they need to push and where they need to allocate resources. There's other things that Hillary Clinton's campaign was doing, or people who were supporting her. There was actually a troll operation, right? It was called Correct the Record. It was funded, had $9 million in its bank account, and it was paying people to pose as Hillary supporters online, right? And to counteract, people who criticized her.
I got targeted. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Yasha Levine, but I got targeted by those guys, and I've actually asked for data retrieval from the Huffington Post to write about it. I don't know if they'll be able to do it or not, because ironically, the data I'm trying to pull is being held by Facebook. So I will talk about all of that in due time, but no, I'm very aware of Correct the Record. I was very aware of it. I was working on the Bernie campaign at the time, which gets back to when people need to unpack their emotions about this. Same is true of troll farms or bots. Are you upset that there are trolls on the internet falsely altering the picture of what people experience? Or are you upset when those trolls are serving a politician you don't like? You better decide, because in my view, both those things are bad, and the existence of trolls themselves is bad. And as for Robbie Mook, my friend, I will just, first of all, it was Ada. I think that system was called Ada,
yes,
named after Ada Lovelace, the first famous woman mathematician. But now the theory is, they say, the Russians hacked it, and that's why the Clinton campaign didn't go to Wisconsin. But we'll see. But Robbie Mook, who was supposed to be the data genius of that campaign, wrote an article, I think it was for The Atlantic, explaining why it wasn't his fault they lost. And one of the links in it, hyperlinks, had the words, Russian government-related troll farms or something like that. I've written about it. But if you clicked on it, it went to an article in Wired about Macedonian teenagers operating independently for money by setting up pro-Trump sites. So Robbie Mook, the data genius, apparently can't distinguish between two separate countries and government versus non-government operations. That's my
because he might counter saying that Macedonia is influenced by Russia. There's some influence there, but yeah, and they both use the sort of Cyrillic in their alphabets. So.
That's very true. I stand corrected.
It's interesting because look, Facebook views elections as a prime money-making activity, a moment, sort of like the Super Bowl or like the Oscars, like that TV networks view the Super Bowl or the Oscars. Facebook views elections in that way because a lot of money is spent in a very short amount of time, right? And $1 billion was spent on digital advertising this past election that we know of. That's sort of, that might even be an understatement. But there's $1 billion to be had, and so companies like Google, Facebook, and Twitter are competing with each other for that money, right? And so they now began embedding their own employees, sort of data scientists, embedding them in campaigns that have big budgets, and essentially these employees function as free consultants, free data consultants, and for these campaigns. And so these companies have become extensions of political campaigns, right? And Hillary Clinton's campaign actually rejected Facebook's offer, as I understand it, to consult, but all the other campaigns, including Bernie's campaign, accepted. And so they have, these companies have specific political divisions where they help candidates sort of fine-tune their message and use Facebook's underlying data and the profiles that Facebook has collected on its users, right, to target them for influence. I mean, that is the name of the game. That is the business that Facebook is in, and it does that in every election. And so, it's like to focus just on Cambridge Analytica is to miss the bigger story, right? And so what we need to be really worried about is Facebook and Google and the business of surveillance and profiling and influence in general that we've allowed to evolve on the internet without any regulation whatsoever, right?
Well, that's very interesting. When I worked on the Bernie campaign, I didn't encounter such a person or people. That doesn't mean they weren't there, but they might have been in a different arm of the operation. But so the logic here, as I understand it, but help me out, and again, we're talking with Yasha Levine, author of the book Surveillance Valley. So the logic would be that Facebook would embed these people for free in political campaigns because it would be in their financial interest to do so, because the political campaigns would then engage through their supporters more and potential voters more through Facebook, and that would increase advertising and volume and eyeballs and all that stuff. Is that the logic?
Yeah, I mean, they're basically helping them craft their digital campaigns, right? So, and when you're crafting digital campaigns, you're crafting them to be targeted. So the whole reason why Facebook is so attractive to political campaigns today is that it allows you to really hone in on specific people with specific issues and agendas, and so to fine tune your message, right, and to calibrate it. So you want this is kind of a complex thing. It can be, and so Facebook creates tools that allow political campaigns to do that, and then it has people who come and show and basically train and work with political candidates in their campaigns to make sure that they're using the software correctly, the targeting software, the targeting and influence software that they rent out to not just to political campaigns, but to advertisers of any kind. I mean, you and I could right now buy that service by going on Facebook and creating a promoted post, for instance, right? And it allows you to target people based on their interests and based on their profiles. But for political campaigns, I think Facebook went even further. It's actually created specialized tools that political campaigns can use. Like you can upload your own voter lists into Facebook, and then it would sort of match it up and do some kind of voodoo that would be able to extrapolate people who are their friends or people who share similar interests, right? Because it would be able to look at what is this person. Okay, so this is a person who you would vote for Hillary Clinton, for instance, and then. Well, that person has a whole network of friends, right, and acquaintances around them. Their social network. Well, those people are probably likely to vote for Hillary Clinton too because they're connected, right? And so you could target people based on that. That's one of a kind of a simple thing that you could do. But there's all sorts of things like that, and Facebook creates these tools specifically for political campaigns and then trains them how to use it. because it makes them money. That's how they make money.
Right.
Placing that stuff.
Just as conflict makes money, competition through election makes money. So that gets us to the question of, or in my mind, but my mind is not always linear in its operation, it gets to the question of the Robert Mueller indictment and the 13, the troll farm, the 13 people, the Internet Research Agency or whatever it's called, and the notion that for $120,000, you could buy enough Facebook ads to alter the outcome of an election. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I got to say that I think maybe Vladimir Putin should open up his own data election outfit and compete with Cambridge Analytica and some of these other firms like the Koch brothers i360, because he clearly knows something, or his people know something that American politicians and the people who run their campaigns they're not even in the same I don't know, they're not even in the same league. Maybe they're not even on the same planet. I mean, it's preposterous. It's a tiny amount of money compared to the $1 billion that was spent on digital advertising in this election campaign, in the 2016 election campaign. It's $100,000 is a rounding error. It's not even. It doesn't even. It's a fraction of a percentage point, right? So to blame these ads and to say that they were able to target the American electorate in such a precise way as to throw the election towards Donald Trump is to really not respect people's intelligence, I think, and it's absurd. And the only reason that people believe it and actually repeat this stuff is because it goes back to, again, that point that people are looking for any reason that they could find and then blame for why Donald Trump was elected, and people don't really understand how this stuff works. It's kind of complicated. It's like you could really convince people that yes, there is some kind of magic voodoo technique that Vladimir Putin and his internet terrorists could come up with that could really really somehow with laser guided precision brainwash people. And it's science fiction, but it's somewhat plausible, I guess, to people who don't understand how this stuff works, because it is complicated. There's a lot of claims thrown around this technology, and what I think what's interesting about sort of the outrage around all this influence operations online is that it's actually, I think, in the end helping Facebook's bottom line, right? Because if you're actually doing marketing and you're advertising Facebook services for future business, right? Because if you're saying that for $100, for $100,000 or $140,000, you could throw an election using Facebook's voodoo targeting technology. I mean, that shows that Facebook is really effective as an advertising and as a marketing platform, right?
Well, you got to admit that picture of Jesus and Satan arm wrestling, it was pretty persuasive. I
was going for Satan personally.
Well, Jesus in that picture looked a lot more like Cat Stevens in the sort of moonshadow phase. I keep saying that, but it's true. And look, obviously people can be influenced by all sorts of things, but at this point I'm more worried about Sinclair Broadcasting buying up most of the local television stations in this country. So what's a takeaway? What should people know when they read these stories going forward?
I mean, I think it's important that we recognize that there is a problem, that there is a sort of underlying attempt to use these technologies to spy on us and to influence our behavior. I think those things are less successful than Facebook and Cambridge Analytica would want you to believe, because that's their business model, depends on it, so they would want you to believe that. But I think it is important that we don't just automatically trust Facebook, because that's sort of the default. That's been the default position of our society for ever since Facebook existed, to just trust these giant companies with all our data and to not think about it. So we need to be skeptical, and we need to be not naive about what's happening. And at some point, we need to, I think, coalesce in some kind of political movement that would stop this, because I think having a giant corporation like that access to so much of our personal information and the ability to potentially not just to influence us, but to limit or to control the information that we're interacting with, right? And the kind of people that we're interacting with online, to mediate that in a democracy is very dangerous. And so we need to move towards a solution, a political solution to this this problem, to this problem. And it's not going to be easy, I think, because I don't think the political really willpower is there. I don't think it's going to come from the top. It's not going to come from the Democratic Party. It's going to have to come from the base. And the base, I think, we have so many problems in America that it's going to be tough to just focus on this one issue. But I think it's going to have to be rolled into generally a kind of, reform of corporate power and a way of breaking up corporate power in some way, because these things are tied together.
Well, we think exactly alike about that stuff. So let's hope that happens. In the meantime, let's keep watching what's going on. Since the internet's watching us, let's watch back. And we count on you for that. Yasha Levine, again, author of the book Surveillance Valley, The Secret Military History of the Internet. Thanks for writing about Cambridge Analytica, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.